Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 8 stories, from stories of eBay, monsters, salesmen, and more. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, please be sure to drop a like rating. Subscribing if you're new is also greatly appreciated. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. There's no fucking way I'm eating that. Penelope looks up at me from across the counter, her blonde hair shining in the dim light. It's pulled up in a messy bun, loose tendrils lying around her face and neck, creating a halo effect in the glow of the bar lights. Her freckled cheeks are slightly pink, partially from the heat of the kitchen, and partially from her closing time glass of wine. Tonight's choice is the last of a very pricey bottle of French Chardonnay. The pale liquid casts a honey glow on the cutting board and knife in front of her. At her back, the kitchen sits dark and quiet, the rest of the staff long since gone home. The far wall is covered in a pale blue backsplash, and the silver of the counters and appliances gleam, dull reflections from the dining room decorating their polished surfaces. Despite her obvious exasperation with me, she has that underlying look of contentment she always gets when she cooks. I love coming to visit her at work for that exact reason, to see the joy it gives her to be in her element. Unfortunately, it also comes with side effects that can prove disastrous for my childlike palate. What happened to "I'll try to be more adventurous," Pen? She gives me a disapproving frown and shakes her knife at me pointedly. Small green bits of herb falling to the cutting board below. I groan as she chastises me. "That was before you tried to feed me a plate of worms." I protest, staring down at the dish in front of me with a mix of horror and disgust. A small mound of thick, white, semi-transparent tubes sits on my plate, nestled on a bed of greens and drizzled with an inky black sauce. I could have tricked myself into thinking they were rice noodles, if they hadn't been moving. The whole mound writhes, sluggish but obviously alive. I shudder at the thought of trying to ingest even one of the disgusting little creatures. How do you even know it's safe? I use my fork to prod at the mass suspiciously, watching the worms curl and wriggle in the sauce. My stomach does a slow flip at the sight. She rolls her eyes at me as she continues mincing the herbs. "You're being ridiculous, Cammy. It's a traditional dish from South America, a very rare delicacy, once enjoyed only by royalty. They're perfectly safe." I frown at the plate, then at her. If they're so rare, then how did Marcus get them? I cast a look over at the man in question, dramatically putting the finishing touches on a tray of desserts as he flirts with the last 2 customers of the night. 2 college-age girls, dressed in designer clothes and giggling behind $50 glasses of Pinot Noir, as they bat their lashes at the handsome proprietor and chef. Marcus is old money. His parents are renowned restaurateurs, famous in the high-end food scene, and had given their son a generous donation to open his own fine dining establishment. Penelope had met Marcus at an event she'd catered, and after one taste of her incredible cooking, he had offered her a job at the newly opened El Experience. Well, he can be a douche sometimes. He's generally a good guy. Pen shrugs with one shoulder, her head down and her hand moving so fast it's almost a blur. The rhythmic sound of chopping underscores her words. His dad's friend was on the expedition that harvested them. They haven't been found in the wild in almost 100 years, but they discovered a thriving population in one of the lesser explored Peruvian caves. It's very exciting. The entire world's supply used to come from a handful of breeders. The worms are parthenogenic, but can only procreate under very specific circumstances. If they can study the new habitat and learn from it, they may be able to help grow the population and make the dish more widely accessible. She looks up at me with excitement in her dark eyes, and I feel myself weakening. It's so hard to say no to her when she looks at me like that. It's the same look that I'd received before she convinced me to try some of her other more questionable culinary endeavors. But escargot and hagi are a far cry from live worms. You know, I thought having a chef for a girlfriend meant I would get to eat real gourmet food, not bugs. I stall, taking a sip of my Pinot Grigio, as I desperately try to come up with a way out of this. She laughs. They're not bugs. They're worms. And like I said, they're a delicacy. It literally doesn't get any more gourmet. Just try one. For me? I groan as I feel the last of my resistance crumble. Fuck. Going to have to eat a worm. I try not to think about what I'm about to do as I carefully extract one noodle-esque creature from the writhing mass. Sauce drips off its translucent body as I twirl it around my fork, hoping to make it into one clean bite. The thought of it wiggling against my face makes me want to scream. It's just a rice noodle. A really fat, squishy rice noodle. I tell myself, holding my breath. I shove the fork into my mouth and swallow the vaguely gummy lump without chewing, like a kid eating a mouthful of spinach. I feel it move against the inside of my mouth and throat as it goes down, and it takes all my willpower not to throw up right there at the bar. Delicious. I choke out, grabbing my water and chugging down a few mouthfuls, desperate to wash away the taste before it could register. Pen laughs at me, shaking her head as she scrapes the herbs off the cutting board and into a bubbling pot on the stove to her right. Thank you, baby. That was very brave. From the other end of the bar, I hear Marcus call out. Impressive. I didn't think you'd do it. You must really love her, Cammy. He grins at us, and I give him a watery smile over the rim of my glass. I take another sip of the icy cold liquid, pushing back the last of my nausea. You have no idea. I cough, a shudder running through me as I put my glass down and pointedly push the dish of worms away, closer to Marcus and his customers, but only enough to eat one worm. He and Penn chuckle as the two girls inspect the rejected plate with obvious curiosity. Those are worms? The redhead leans across her friend, crinkling her pixie nose at the black and white mess. Is it some kind of, exotic dish? She practically purrs as she looks up at Marcus from under thick lashes, too perfect to be anything but extensions. I stifle my urge to groan at the suggestive display as Penn and I exchange a glance. She subtly rolls her eyes and smiles. Marcus always has that effect on girls. You can practically smell the good breeding on him, and the handsome face didn't hurt matters. And in the charm and, well, Marcus is pretty popular. It translates to a packed dining room and a great job for my girlfriend, so I guess I can't really complain. He gives the girls a charismatic smile as he puts the dessert tray into the fridge and wipes a white and green cloth over the counter, closing down his section of the kitchen. Yes, exactly. These are very rare Peruvian worms, straight from a cave in the southern part of the country. They're the first ones harvested from the wild in almost a century. That's Nathan B. Walker from Nat Geo. He's a friend of the family. He's in an association with one of the world's best cave explorers, Ricardo Garrett. My father funded a trip for them to go and look for these little babies. The redhead swoons and exclaims accordingly. leaning on the bar in an overly exaggerated display of interest. They knew they would be in the cave? The redhead's friend, a tall brunette in a rhinestone-studded jacket, cocks her head to the side, looking visibly disturbed by the delicacy. Marcus nods as he tosses the cloth into the laundry bin on the other side of the prep counter. They suspected it, yes. It's the central section of caves in a largely unexplored system, and almost impossible to access without specialized equipment and training. Nate and Ricardo were probably the first people to set foot there in centuries. It was identified as a target for exploration because the conditions in that cave are very similar to the original habitat in the western part of Peru. The water is more acidic in the southern cave, but it's only made the worms hardier. They breed prolifically. The cave system is filled with them. My father says it'll be months before they can clear the red tape and start harvesting. But in the meantime, he got me a small container to try. He knows I've been obsessed with traditional Peruvian cuisine lately. The redhead gasps and fawns over Marcus as Penn and I stifle our laughs at his obnoxious bragging. The brunette doesn't seem quite as interested in his charms at the moment, watching the plate with obvious revulsion. Ew, are they alive? Even the redhead's attention is diverted at her friend's question, drawn to the gray porcelain plate of the singular semi-transparent line inching its way over the greens, leaving a trail of black sauce in its wake. I feel my stomach churn as I watch the escapee, trying not to think about its friend currently residing in my stomach. Is it moving like that inside me? I shudder at the thought, taking another gulp of my water. Marcus answers, looking amused. Yes, they live in water but most of the time, but can survive on land for days. The worms are traditionally served alive, on a bed of native herbs and leaves. That black sauce is made of squid ink, humanely sourced of course. They're very good, truly an experience. He gives the redhead a sly wink and she giggles into her wine glass. Ugh, it might be more nauseating than the worms. I give Penn a look over my own nearly empty glass, signaling that we should leave soon. She nods to me, pouring the contents of the pot into a large square kitchen tub and moving it to the prep counter behind her. Would you like to try one? Penn offers the girls as she places the pot in the sink and returns to wipe down her side of the counter. Somehow, I don't think she'll be eating anymore. She gives me a teasing grin, which I return. The brunette declines, still looking slightly unnerved, but her drunk friend is feeling more adventurous. She totters over on tall stiletto heels, slurping up a few of the worms like spaghetti and washing them down with a mouthful of wine. She's laughing as she returns to her seat. Marcus takes almost half of what remains with a smug grin and a waggle of eyebrows in my direction. Yeah, definitely time to leave, I think, turning my attention to admire the curve of Penelope's back under her sheer green blouse as she leans over the sink scrubbing the pot. She steps back with a satisfied nod, wiping her hands on the hem of her black apron and untying the strings at the small of her back. She pulls it over her head, dropping in the laundry bin on her way back towards me. I drain the rest of my wine in anticipation of going home as Penn rounds the corner of the bar and comes to stand on my left side. Leaning over the square dish, she scoops up a forkful of dripping worms and gulps them down with a forkful of greens, barely seeming to chew, then repeats until the plate is clean. She moves to bring the dishes to the back, but Marcus waves her off. I'll finish up here, Penn. You go home. It was a busy day and you've earned it. He gives her a look over his own glass of wine, freshly refilled, as are his customers. She smiles knowingly and places the plate back down with a nod. All right, Marcus. Thanks. Babe, you ready? She turns to me, standing and holding out her jacket. My own was already on, and both our purses rest on my chair. Yep. I grin at her, and she gives me a wry smile. sliding her arms into the sleeves of her black leather jacket and taking her mint green clutch from the chair. See you on Monday, Marcus. Have a nice evening, ladies. Penn calls out. I wave over my shoulder as we head down to the side hall to the staff entry at the rear of the building, then out into the parking lot. The late summer sun has long since set and the wind carries a distinctly autumn-like chill. A few crickets chirp in the grass, bordering the asphalt, and the low thump of music and voices filters out from the club across the street. Aside from Marcus's flashy Corvette, and what must be his customer's BMW, our old blue sedan is the only car left in the lot. We drive home in companionable silence. She's tired from a long day, and I'd worked the early shift at the dealership. The whole weekend stretches out in front of us. Our first time off together since the summer began. Between our jobs and my master's degree, our schedules are rarely aligned. We'd book these days off a month in advance so we could hang out before my classes started again in September. You coming to bed with me? I raise my voice above the sound of the shower as I lean over the sink and splash water on my face. Penn's voice carries on a cloud of citrus-scented air, billowing over the aqua and lime green curtain separating us. No, not yet. I want to stay up for a bit. Soon, though. Hey, I forgot to ask. Did you get a spot in that class? I dry my face on my favorite blue towel, my annoyed groan muffled by the thick cotton. It's still full, so now I'll have a huge gap between my classes on Wednesdays and my work schedule is fucked. Andre says we'll look at moving my shifts around, so maybe that'll help. I turn my hand through my hair with a sigh, then shake my head. But I'll deal with that on Monday. I'm all yours for the weekend, starting tomorrow morning. I pull back the edge of the curtain and she leans in to give me a wet kiss. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. I have a special dinner planned. You'll see. All your favorites. I step back with a smile, wiping my face on my arm. Can't wait. I call over my shoulder as I head to our bedroom. I wake to a low sound, like groaning followed by a splash. I go to sit up, but a sudden, sharp pain in my stomach stops me. What the fuck? It's a stabbing sensation deep within my abdomen, making me roll over to my side with my hand wrapped around my belly protectively. As I lie there gritting my teeth, the sound filters through the open bedroom door again. Groan, splash. Through the haze of pain and disorientation, the noise finally registers. Throwing up. Penn is throwing up. I force myself to the side of the bed and roll out with an agonized moan. Waves of nausea assail me as I fight to remain standing and lumber towards the door. Food poisoning. Probably those fucking worms. I think to myself, sweat beading on my upper lip and brow. I lean heavily on the hallway wall, my arm sliding over the painted surface with every step. I try to focus on the coolness against my feverish skin, desperate to fight off the queasiness long enough to make it to my girlfriend. If I feel like this, Penn must be in even worse shape. I see her bent over the plate in my mind's eye, slurping up the pale worms, squid ink and all. Must have been more than a dozen there. I force the memory away and concentrate on my breathing, trying to settle my stomach through will alone. Though the hallway is barely 10 feet long, it feels like it takes 20 minutes to reach the bathroom at the other end. Warm, yellow light spills out into the neutral tone carpet, a low shadow indicating Penn is slumped in front of the toilet. Her soft whimpers are audible even before I round the corner, rubbing my eyes with a fist. Penn? You okay? She had turned the small countertop lamp on instead of the brighter overhead fixture, and the dim glow is gentle on my tired eyes. The light casts long shadows across the counters and floors, strange shapes to match the myriad of bottles and jars that line our sink. She lifts her hand weakly in response to my voice, but remains still otherwise. With a pained grunt, I step closer, clenching my teeth against the ache in my stomach. As I do, a black shape on the floor next to the toilet catches my gaze. A small puddle of dark liquid about the diameter of a grapefruit. I focus on it intently, trying to identify the substance, but it's too dim in the room. I look up towards the sink and see there's more on the lip, leaving a trail down the rickety cabinet door to the frigid tile below. Must be her vomit. I guess the squid ink is really concentrated. Reassured, I bend down carefully and put my hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. I'll get you some water, I say, moving off towards the sink. She makes a strained noise that may or may not be a response, but I pay it no mind, focusing on the half-full glass next to Pen's phone, just left of the faucet. She must have been getting water when she started to throw up. I reach the counter after what seems like an eternity and brace my shaking hands on either side of the basin, leaving my hips clear of the trail of puke down the front of the cupboard. I close my eyes for a moment, drawing breath in through my nose. Fuck, don't throw up yet. Summoning my strength, I open my eyes and reach for the glass, but sudden movement in the sink draws my attention. I freeze with my arm outstretched, my blood running cold as my body realizes the implications before my tired brain can catch up. The same dark liquid that's on the floor and cabinet lines the basin, ringing the drain with a shade more crimson than black. I had assumed it was the squid ink giving the vomit its dark color, but the reddish tint makes me instantly worried. It's just from her wine. I try to tell myself as I stare hard into the puddle. But didn't she have white wine tonight? Time seems to slow as I focus on the sink's contents. I'm just about to turn away, convinced I'm freaking myself out over nothing, when I see it. A slow, tentacle-esque movement. A thin, narrow string, furling and unfurling as it writhes in the middle of the porcelain basin. Its translucent form drawing patterns in what I am now sure is my girlfriend's blood. A worm. It's a fucking worm. A breathless scream escapes me as I jump back, frantically wiping my hands down my chest and legs. In my mind, I'm crawling with the things. Their tiny, grasping bodies reaching for me from their trail down the cabinet. Oh God, they're in me too. The comprehension of my own infestation brings a fresh round of nausea, and I stagger back towards the sink, heedless of the tiny invaders already occupying the basin. Before I can reach it, another stabbing pain shoots through my lower belly, sending me to my knees with a strangled cry. I double over, breathing through gritted teeth as my nausea is temporarily overcome by the sharp ache. Pen, are you okay? A low thud answers my question, and I lift my head to see she has slumped down onto the floor unconscious. A thin stream of blood and bile leaks from the corner of her mouth, and her shirt is stained red over her stomach in a constellation of small dots. Her hair spreads across the tile beneath her, her skin pale and damp with sweat. Pen? My voice is hoarse and barely audible as I begin to move towards her on instinct. Another wave of pain washes through me as I drag myself to her side. Penelope, answer me. I grab her face in a shaking hand, desperate to see the rise and fall of her chest. She groans softly but does not wake, doing little to allay my fears. When I had first come to check on her, I had been so focused on the puddle that I hadn't even glanced in the toilet. But after seeing what lay in the sink, I need to know how serious the situation is. With dread accompanying every movement, I drag myself up to look over the porcelain rim. A small cry of revulsion and fear escapes me at the sight. Even with the dim light and shadows, the contents of the toilet are both horrifying and undeniable. Worms, filling the bowl almost halfway up, in a variety of sizes. Some are tiny, barely the length of a grain of rice, but others are already the size of the adults we'd eaten only hours ago. There are hundreds of them, slipping and writhing against each other in the dark red liquid and making its surface move like a boiling soup on a stove. I vomit without warning, adding my own crimson bile to the bowl. Marcus and Penelope's voices whisper in my ear, replaying their words from the restaurant as I purge my stomach. They haven't been found in the wild in almost 100 years. The water is more acidic in the South Cave, but it's only made the worms hardier. They breed prolifically. The cave system is filled with them. I throw up again, feeling the burn of my stomach contents on the delicate tissue of my throat. Acidic, like their home, the perfect breeding ground. I feel close to madness at the thought of what fills my belly. My thoughts begin to spiral, my brain convinced I can feel wiggling in my mouth and throat as the worms writhe, searching for freedom with the same slow creeping exploration its predecessor had used to try and escape the plate at El Experience. Help. We need help. I struggle to all fours and crawl across the smooth gray tiles to the counter. Hang on, baby. I'm going to call 911. You'll be okay. Just hang on. I hear the panic and desperation in my voice and let it fuel me, pushing past the agony in my guts to haul myself up the edge of the counter and grab Penelope's phone with a clammy, weak hand. I lean my forearms against the cool surface, trying to hit the emergency button on her iPhone. My fingers, wet with blood, shake so badly that I keep missing, smearing red across our smiling faces in her background picture. Another wave of anguish overtakes me, summoning fresh vomit from my tortured stomach. It's all I can do to aim towards the sink. The vaguely gritty liquid splashes up the opposite side of the basin and leaves a splash of writhing scarlet across the white linoleum. I stab at the emergency button again and it finally registers, prompting me to confirm. I manage to hit yes and am relieved to hear a ringing sound as the call goes through. I slide down the cupboards to the floor and put the phone on speaker, gripping it in one hand as I crawl back towards Pen, still lying motionlessly on the ground. Is her shirt bloodier? I close the distance between us, staring down at the polka dot pattern decorating Penelope's favorite lilac t-shirt. When she'd first collapsed, the dozen or so dots were barely larger than sesame seeds and looked more like splashes from a violent bout of sickness. Now they're much larger, closer to the size of dimes, with fresh pinpricks interspersed between the growing circles. Her belly is swollen under the loose fabric, bulging in a way I had never seen before. 911, what's your emergency? A calm, soothing voice pulls my attention from Pen's shirt as I hasten to answer the operator. Yes, please help us. My girlfriend and I, we ate some kind of Peruvian worm dish at her work and now we're both throwing up worms. Please, there's so much blood and she's unconscious. I'm sobbing openly into the phone as I kneel next to Pen, stroking the hair back from her face with a shaky hand. Okay, try and stay calm. I'm sending help to you. Can you confirm your address to me? 4336 Seaglass Lane, apartment 5. Please hurry. She ate so much more than I did. I let myself slump down to lay on the ground next to her, a fresh wave of stabbing pain in my gut making me writhe in serpentine agony, like one of the creatures that have invaded my body. I suddenly become aware of a warm, sticky sensation on my lower belly and stare down at the 3 red dots lining my midriff in confusion. When did I get it on myself? The operator's voice sounds tinny and far away, fading as my attention focuses on the slowly expanding circles of red on my own stomach. Burning pain eats at the flesh of my lower abdomen as my mind fills with terrified thoughts of what this means. My own belly is swollen and bloated too. Not as pronounced as Pen's, but definitely not normal. I rest my hand on the upper curve gingerly, my breath coming in anxious pants. With shaking hands and a half-formed scream in my throat, I sit up and lift the hem of my t-shirt, slowly drawing it up the face of my distended stomach. The material sticks slightly before giving way. The blood already half dried and tacky. Part of me knows what I'm going to see even before my eyes register the cause of the strange red circles. Thin, white threads poking up from the epicenter of the bloodstains. Probing, flailing, reaching, escaping their host. A primal scream emanates from me as I watch the juvenile worms try and force their way out of my body. I drop the phone and begin clawing at myself frantically, feeling the fragile threads of my sanity snapping under the pressure of this waking nightmare. Distantly, I hear the 911 dispatcher telling me to remain calm, that the ambulance is right around the corner. But he doesn't know. He doesn't know what's in me, what's coming out of me. I sob, my heartbeat loud in my ears and my breath short. Blackness creeps into the edges of my vision as I collapse back onto the floor next to Pen. My field of view narrowing to a tube of gleaming white porcelain streaked with writhing crimson. I'm dimly aware that this must be a panic attack. Severe enough to knock me out, but I am well past the point of calming myself down. Instead, I scream until the blackness takes me. I woke in the hospital 2 days later. My limbs stiff from immobility and my stomach aching. Pen was in the bed next to mine, her face pale but her breathing steady. We would later learn that Marcus and his red-haired customer, Sophia, were also admitted that night, after her friend found them throwing up worms and drove them both to the nearest emergency room. It would be almost a week until Sophia and I were released from the hospital. Penelope and Marcus were there much longer, having ingested so many more of the worms. The damage to their intestines had been far more extensive. The infestation would have been the end of Pen and I financially if Marcus's father hadn't offered to pay for everything. A gesture of contrition for sending the worms back for human consumption without proper testing and study first. In the months following the incident, researchers discovered that the original population of worms had become split between cave systems hundreds of thousands of years ago. This had led to the evolution of two breeds of the same species, identical, save for a few key differences. The western caves were expansive and food was abundant, so the worm population had flourished with little adaptation needed. Before changes in the local ecosystem and over-harvesting of the expensive Delicacy drove the worms to complete extinction in the wild. The southern worms, on the other hand, had ended up in a smaller system of caves that was very difficult to access and had little in the way of food. It was a harsh environment, but the offshoot worm population had adapted extremely well to the acidic waters and lack of resources. Their tolerance for a wider variety of food sources and breeding conditions had allowed the worms to transcend their place as lowly bottom feeders and became the dominant water-dwelling species in the southern caves. Only their isolated environment and cannibalistic tendencies kept the prolific species in check. It's a true testament to nature that human stomach acid wasn't enough to kill the southern worms. That instead of curling up and dying like their western counterparts, they had bred in the closed environments of our stomachs. Their asexual reproduction combined with the species' rapid growth rates and huge numbers of offspring had quickly created a space deficit. And like any adaptable organism, the worms had tried to expand their territory and search for new resources by burrowing their way to the surface. It seemed hard to believe these simple differences between the worms had combined to create the nightmare Penelope, Marcus, Sophia, and I had lived through. But it was later confirmed by several other research groups. The southern variety of worms were ultimately classified as unfit for live consumption, It never reached the widespread status Marcus and Penelope had initially hoped for. Pen and I have mostly recovered at this point. She kept her job at the restaurant, eventually working her way back into the kitchen full-time once her and Marcus were well enough to reopen. Somehow, she hasn't let the incident taint her love for food, but I can confidently say that my palate remains safely childlike. Towns like ours have an oddness to them. Unlike the lively growth of urban cities and suburbs, our town's heyday lies behind it, not ahead. As such, we find ourselves occupying a space defined by what it was, rather than what it is. New construction is far and few between. Businesses and restaurants inhabit the often century-old buildings of town like the commercial equivalent of hermit crabs. The few blocks of houses that extend from the town center are reminiscent of an era lost to time, as it is only the modern cars and satellite dishes that remind us that we are, in fact, not lost to time ourselves. I've been our town's resident tree guy for the better part of 2 decades. I fell into the job by sheer happenstance as my wife's father was retiring from his own tree cutting service right after we got married. After a few months of learning the trade, he left me to start out on my own. Being as our town isn't the biggest though, I've never needed to contend with a rival business. As such, my work was and still is fairly quiet and simple, with a few exceptions. I can work at my own pace, and the pay is decent. As the only tree service in town, jobs are fairly regular, and in this industry, it isn't like people can choose when they need a tree removed. When a tree decides to go, there is little a resident can do besides call me. Most of my work takes place close to the town center, as the farmers outside the city limits usually have the capacity to handle things on their own. Such was the case when I was called out to the Hinson house, just a block or so from the center of town. Like the rest of our community, the Hinson house is no different in its being from another era. In fact, no one in this community has carried the last name Hinson in at least 50 years. I'm not sure when the house was originally built, but it doesn't stand out amongst its immediate neighbors as exceedingly new. Aristocrat Row is what the locals call the once ornate mansions of Gillard Street, a reminder of the wealth that left town generations ago. Many of the houses now lay in ruin or squalor, as their symbols of status have eroded alongside their paint jobs. A few houses remain in decent shape, though. The Howard's Law Office comes to mind, as does William Eggert's physical therapy practice. There are also a few families that have bought houses along the row with the intention of restoring them to their former glory, with a wide variance of success. A man by the name of Malcolm Mitchcam is the one who gave me the call, as he and his family were among those who intended to renovate one of the houses. When he told me he was the new owner of the Hinson house, I knew immediately what work needed to be done. The Hinson house has a behemoth black oak in its front yard, right up near the front of the property. To my memory, it is the only tree on the entire property, but what it lacks is company. It makes up for in size. It's one of those trees that changes the entire world around it, as in the summer its canopy near blocks out the sun. It has to be one of the oldest trees in town, and certainly older than the house itself. I remember about a year ago we had a nasty lightning storm that killed a few trees throughout town. When the spring came and the tree old bore no new leaves, I suppose Mr. Mitchum had rightly concluded that his tree had also fallen victim to a lightning strike. "You must be Malcolm," I remember asking him upon pulling into their narrow gravel drive. "That's me, all right," laughed the man. He was at least 5 years my younger, and had the type of smile that made you feel abundantly welcome. He was a fairly small fellow, both in height and build. I remember thinking it was funny to see a guy wearing a button-up shirt on such an occasion, seeing as it was a hot day, and he was working in the yard. "You're a lifesaver for helping us get this mammoth out of here. I hate to see such a piece of history taken down, but nothing lasts forever, right?" "It's part of the job. I'm glad you called me before it started shedding limbs. I've seen too many people and too much property damaged on account of dead trees." "Oh, I am almost certain of that. I mean, this tree alone has already claimed enough lives to warrant its removal." I was a tad puzzled by the man's comment, as I figured I'd know about my instance where falling limbs and trees had harmed a townsperson. "Really? How's that?" The man seemed excited by my question, as his expression turned to one of enthusiastic gratification. He knew something about the property I didn't, which is a lifelong resident of this town. It was an uncommon situation for me to find myself in. "Oh, well, my mother used to work here at the library here in town, and when my wife and I told her we had bought the house, she pulled together a few newspaper clippings from their archives. As it turns out, this plot was the site of the first county jail. They say it was chosen because this exact tree was perfect for hanging. The town's first sheriff was even quoted on the paper stating, 'It was as if the tree knew its purpose even before we did, as if it grew with the express purpose of serving the hangman.'" I'm not sure how many people were hanged there, though imagine it was more than one. "I had no idea. That's fascinating," I replied. I was generally uninterested in history, though I found this story to be particularly fascinating. "Yeah, and there's more. About 50 years ago, one of the last Hinsons came out here and flung a rope around one of the higher branches. He proceeded to climb up the tree in broad daylight, and with a leap from the tree, hung himself." Wow, I've never heard that in my life. That's incredibly eerie. I was slightly disturbed by his story, though assumed it was likely just that, a story. I was quite sure I would have heard such a tale growing up had it been true, though I suppose it is possible the town kept it quiet. "There was one final tragedy here. Some while ago there was a child playing on a swing out here. You know, one of the ones made from a board and rope. Well, no one was quite sure how it happened, but his folks came out one day to find, well, the tree was unfortunately unwilling to seize its role as a hanging tree, if you understand." Now that made me a bit sick. This I knew was no tale, as a vivid memory from grade school crept into my mind's eye. Some boy I had gone to school with, I think he was a bit younger than me, had been tragically killed from what I was told was a swing accident. I was too young to know where the boy lived, and though the town was in shock for at least a year, I never recalled knowing anyone who really knew the family. I think they might have been from out of town, but nevertheless, parents were hesitant to let their children play on the swings while I was growing up. He looked less excited now, and possessed an appropriately solemn look on his face. I responded, "Well, I should have it down and out in a day or two, weather permitting. After that, your yard will have enough sunlight to maybe plant a garden. Regardless, you'll never know this tree was here." A smile returned as he responded, "Oh, wonderful. I'm glad to hear you can make quick work of it. As for seeing it again, though, my wife and I actually have some plans for it." "Oh, and what's that?" "Well, we were curious if you might keep the logs a little longer. My brother owns a sawmill a few towns over, and we are hoping to incorporate some of the wood into our renovation, an homage to the house's history." This was not the first time I had had a customer request wood from a felling, and I was more than happy to oblige. "That's fantastic. I hate seeing old trees like this one feed the wood chipper. And black oak can make for some stunning woodwork. I would be more than happy to leave the logs sawmill ready. Ah, wonderful. Thank you so much again. I think my wife and I just aren't ready to let the old tree die just yet. Thank you again, and let me know if you need anything from the house. After that, we bid one another farewell, and he went back to working in the yard. I called up my only other employee, Jonah, and waited for him to arrive. The tree was a formidable adversary, even to the untrained eye. The diameter had to be at least 15 feet across, and the massive branches spindled upwards at least 100 feet. There were no leaves on the behemoth, which left its skeletal structure looming above the estate, unobscured. The black bark of the monster contrasted starkly against the overcast sky, granting the momentary illusion that the world was in black and white. We started cutting as Jonah arrived with the equipment. He's a much better climber than myself and made it to the top of the tree in no time. As he started cutting into the first branch, I could hear the chainsaw straining against the wood. After a solid minute or two, he was finally able to drop the first limb. I walked over to the felled limb and noticed just how dark the actual wood was. Normally, oaks have a lighter brown hue to them, but this wood seemed a dark, rich ebony. The rest of the tree was similarly difficult for Jonah and me to tackle. Twice Jonah got caught in his harness and almost fell out of the tree, or worse. Our saw chains were coated in a thick, tar-like sap that we couldn't clean off, forcing us to buy a new chain after the job was complete. When we were finally done, I noticed that Jonah looked somewhat paler than usual. His face drained of its usual tan color. As I was walking towards the Hinson house to get Mr. Mitchum, I heard Jonah start gagging behind me. I turned around just in time to see he was throwing up all over the ground, the black sap still covering his hands and shirt. Come on, Jonah. Let's get you home, bud. In you go. I helped him into the cab of my truck and drove him back to his little place a few blocks away. Call me once you're feeling better, man. You must have just picked up a bug or something. He nodded and gave me a weak thumbs up, before ultimately vomiting into the garbage bin beside his couch. I didn't see Jonah after that. I mean, I most definitely heard from him, calling every day to make sure he was okay. After almost 2 weeks of being terribly ill, he seemed to be on the mend. I called him one afternoon and he sounded excited to return to work. However, when he didn't show the next day, I went to call him again, only to find he had blocked my number. I later learned from my mother that Jonah had skipped town that evening to go live with a distant relative for a little while. His family seemed concerned and upset, though it wouldn't be the first time I have seen someone in this business up and leave in a hurry. It was strange though, as Jonah was a good worker, and always talked fondly of living in town. All the same, life continued and it wasn't long before I had hired help again. As for the Hinson house, I didn't hear much after I took that tree out. Malcolm and I exchanged pleasantries. He paid me in cash, and that was essentially the end of it. From time to time, I would be working on a job in the neighborhood and see the Hinson house looking more and more inhabitable as their renovation progressed. It was early autumn when I got the news about the Mitchums. Some people are just sick in the head. Born that way or raised that way, I don't know. But it's terrible all the same. My friend Eric stated, cupping his coffee between his hands. You did some work for that guy, didn't you? Who the hell would have thought a little fellow like him was capable of such awfulness? You ever feel weird around him? No, not at all, I replied. Granted, I only talked to the man a handful of times. He didn't strike me as the type to renovate a house. I remember that. But then again, he didn't strike me as a suicidal murderer either. Well, the sooner the town can put it behind us, the better. This town is too small for tragedies like that. I nodded in agreement. No question about that. Say, what do you think is going to become of the Hinson house now that it's vacant? Oh, I imagine once the realty company ensures there's not a trace of those two left in the house, they'll put it up for sale again. They'll be lucky to get a fraction of what it's worth given the baggage that sicko left there. Mercilessly killing your wife and yourself with a crowbar. People don't forget that type of shit quickly. It'll be a bargain, that's for sure. But you won't catch me dead anywhere near that place. Yeah, no question it'll be hard to sell. You know, me and the missus are looking for a new place now that the little one has grown out of the crib. You wonder if... Eric squinted at me and set his coffee down before smiling. You're a crazy bastard for even considering it, partner. But I suppose if you three can stomach living in the murder house, it might be worth the deal. Just might be, partner. Just might be. The house was a steal. More than I even care to admit. The Mitchums had completed their renovation almost entirely before their unsettling demise, and the Hinson house had been almost entirely restored to its former glory. A modern kitchen was the only real departure the renovators had from the Victorian elements of the original house. Ornate mantels, doors, and scones adorned the house in wonderful Victorian fashion, and each room felt a portal to a different time. The entryway boasted an impressive staircase and banister, and in the grand foyer, a wooden oak floor so black one might mistake it for ebony. Say what you want about that nut. He did a damn good job on the renovations, I said. Don't mention him anymore, darling. That part still freaks me out. I want this to be our house, not theirs. My wife scolded. You're right, you're right. This is our house, not anyone else's. And hey, I had a hand in this renovation if you do recall. This stunning floor was milled from a tree felled by yours truly. I did indeed know that. As well every dinner guest we ever have, I'm sure. She laughed and rolled her eyes. The dream started the first night we slept there. To be honest, they haven't stopped since. In the dream, I stand out in the yard, looking back on the house. That is, I look back where the house should be, but there is nothing there. I stand where that old tree was, and cannot move besides the sway that comes with a strong gust of wind. I woke up last week and went downstairs to see my boy playing in the foyer. He had his toy cars and was using the lines of the floorboards like traffic lanes. I noticed little divots and scratches all across the floor. Well concealed but professional wood filler. The darkness of the foyer was stunning and unnerving at once, like watching a massive storm approach from the distance. Honey? Yes, love? Honey, you've been standing on the stairs for nearly 10 minutes, just watching him play, and you haven't said a word. Are you feeling okay? Yes, of course, love. I must have just zoned out, you know? I haven't been sleeping too well. That's news to me. I bet a freight train could come through our room, and you wouldn't budge an inch. Maybe it's that new bed we've got. But you sleep deeper here than I have ever seen you. She wasn't wrong about that. I was sleeping fine, but no matter how long I slept for, I could never avoid feeling drained the next day. I have been having more and more dreams about this place the longer we stay. At first, I believed it was the house, with its unsavory recent history, that was causing the dreams. However, I have come to believe that it is not the house, but the tree that is prompting these dreams. Like a fly, I feel trapped in its black tar-like sap. It robs me of rest every night, as even when I am able to sleep, I dream of death and despair, all well frozen in place, moved only by the wind. Many things have happened here, many bad things. I see them in my dreams, and though I cannot remember them when I awake, I know somewhere deep inside me that the history of this place is darker than I can comprehend. I don't know who or what is responsible for it, but the very soil beneath our feet harbors something monstrously wicked. I remember my high school biology teacher telling us about how plants gather water and nutrients. Some is collected via their leaves, while the rest is gathered through deep, complex root systems. The roots send water and nutrients up the plant where the plant collects it and uses it to survive. This process, if I remember correctly, is known as capillary action. I believe that the Hinson's tree roots found their way into some terrible evil, and have ever since been accumulating an ancient malevolence buried long ago. Mr. Mitchum, perhaps, was not a bad man. Perhaps Mr. Mitchum, like myself, learned the truth about this place. Perhaps those scratches and divots in the cursed floor were his maddened attempt to destroy the evil within. That malevolence tainted the mind of Mr. Mitchum. It sickened Jonah and took the lives of countless people through history, and now is spread throughout my own home. We tread atop it every day, play upon it, glide upon it with bare feet. We have been irrevocably tainted by the evil of that tree. Where Malcolm failed, I will prevail. It doesn't have to continue. I can stop this wicked cycle once and for all, and furthermore, I consider it my duty to do so. My wife and boy are sound asleep upstairs, and though they experience temporary discomfort, I freed them from this evil once and for all. I will end this cycle. I will return his evil back to the soil from which it came. All it shall take is the drop of a match. I split some of the gasoline on my hands. I always liked the way it smelled. As I re-enter the home, our home, I look around and see the empty fuel cans around me. I sit on the foyer floor, as black as night, and with a final breath, prepare to strike the match. Transcript has been collected unanimously from a strange website that also only involved a spiritual self-help blog. This same transcript was quickly deleted hours after. My name's Alex. I lost my job a couple months ago and got evicted from my apartment. So now I'm staying at my mom's until I can sort everything out. But the past months have been hard, and no matter how many interviews I have, I'm not getting hired. I can't even sleep sometimes. Not even NyQuil would put me out at times. So completely out of it. I've been just going through the internet all day. Seeing the weirdest shit, you know? For fun. I would go through all the internet myths and the obscure wacky crap by crazies. And I know none of what any of this stuff says is true. At least I think they're all fake. At least I think most of them are fake. I know this sounds crazy, but I was looking through a certain website. Forgot what the hell it was called, but it was full of prophecy bullshit. Well, while I was looking at them, one was about dreams. That kind of, if you read this, you'll dream this. Stuff always creeped me the hell out. So I tried to skip it, but I couldn't resist. When you get a glimpse, it stays with you regardless. It said, "For whom this message reaches, know that what you read will pass. The very next time you dream, it may be one of your last. That is if, and only if, you see yourself in a maze. Get out of that maze and you will find your way out." I closed the tab almost immediately after I finished that, but since I just recited it, you probably know it stuck with me. But I was pretty distracted the rest of the night. The other crazy stuff I saw kind of washed that thing out, but it was probably written by some crackhead online anyway. I managed to sleep that night with an empty mind. Strange, since I usually didn't sleep this early. But what I dreamed made me regret it all. I was in the middle of multiple paths, all leading a different way. Not being very self-aware in my dream, I was kind of panicking. I'm not really into getting lost. I haphazardly just ran around the maze, picking paths at random, like a lobotomized lab rat. I don't know why I wasn't even trying to go the right way, but I wasn't, and I would wake up the next morning. The freaky dream did not go away at all. It would come back to me at random. It wasn't pleasant in the slightest. It didn't take me long to connect it to that dumb message on the internet. I was still skeptical though, and just thought it was a one-time thing. That by me freaking out this dream would happen, I inadvertently caused it. That's exactly why I hate dream crap like that. Self-assured, I applied for a couple jobs and went through the web again. But going through it, I remembered that these weird prophecies were pretty recent. Maybe something new was on there. I hesitated for a second, remembering what the last dumb thing did to that night. But feeling self-assured, I didn't see what was wrong with checking again. Barely remembering the URL, I managed to get it again anyway. But it looked like all the other posts I failed to read yesterday were completely gone. The dream one was still there though. Maybe the person behind this just happened to delete all that today. Starting fresh, I guess. But there was one more, which looked like it was just posted, right next to the dream one. It read, "You're in the maze now, but will it let you leave? Will it refuse? Only if you let it." It has been 2 days since I read that second message. Nothing new has been posted, and I haven't slept since I read it, thinking the nightmares would worsen. Not that I ever had trouble staying awake, but the sleep would be nice. I also managed to get a job interview for tomorrow, when I'm nice and sleep deprived. I'm sure the baggy eyes won't hinder how efficient of a person I'll look. Skip the interview. Another message was posted again saying, "Keeping yourself from visiting the maze will prevent your participation. We cannot have such a thing. Failure to participate will result in your disqualification." I have no idea what this disqualification thing meant, but I don't want to know. I have to do this tonight if I want to know, so I will. Happened again. I was lost in the maze, back where I left off at least, and it seems I actually had some of my brain intact this time, considering I was actually careful where I was going. But the last turn I made resulted in me facing this complete void. A black spectral figure that loosely resembles a person. It whispered my name right at that moment in which I woke up. As soon as I woke up, I went to that page and refreshed the page every hour. Finally, a post comes that afternoon. The ones you love, are they right for you? Only if you know they won't hinder you from yourself. More philosophical garbage I don't want to know the repercussions of. Only really seeing my mom frequently, I locked my bedroom door that night. She might keep me from finishing the maze. That night I felt I was ready. I knew I was ready. This has to be the last time I'll have the stupid dream, and I can put it all behind me. I woke up in the maze, back to where I was. I trudged for what felt like hours. The wind and my footsteps were all I heard. I went around it again, getting lost at times, backtracking many times, for what felt like hours. But this place was timeless. Not knowing the time made this feel like days until I saw it. The light, beaming from the other side of the maze. I was here. I'm almost out. God, the flash of it all. It was like the gates of heaven. After the deprivation I dealt with over this, it was about to end. I quickly ran for it, as if these heavenly gates would close if I wasn't fast enough. Then, as I grew nearly there, another one of those apparitions showed up out of nowhere. It got in my way. "Alex. Alex." It repeated. It was like it was calling my name. But no, I know it wasn't. I know it was taunting me. Annoyed by this thing keeping me from my goal, I tried to shove it out of the way, and that surprisingly worked. It was a ghostly being, but it was a physical enough to have been affected by the push. It dropped to the ground completely, not speaking anymore, Black ooze poured out from what seems to have been its head. Satisfied, I started running again, this time faster than I ever think I did in my life. "The exit," I whispered. I rushed through the light as if it would blind me if I took the time to admire it. Through reflex, I shut the doors completely, and with that it seemed I took out the bright light. Now, wherever I was, it was pitch black. But one thing shined in the distance. It was a great big throne of gold, and from behind it, a decrepit old man in a robe approached me. "So you completed the maze, Alex?" He strained out with what sounded like fossilized vocal cords. In my excitement and on nerve, I nodded. "That's good to hear, but the journey has just begun." He let out with a toothless smile. "Follow me." We walked towards the shining golden throne. Nothing but pitch black shadows could be seen anywhere else. "Sit," he politely said. I sat myself down. It was surprisingly uncomfortable. The seat itself was surprisingly round and very low. I could easily lie down on it. He began rummaging around the inside of his robe. "Where did I put it?" he questioned. He started to look a lot more like a forgetful grandfather than he already had. I waited patiently in his strange throne. Yes, this must be it." He pulled out a slender dagger, bedazzled with numerous jewels. It looked ancient, but as if it was just made. The design is like one of some forgotten race. "Now, I want you to cut out your flesh," he asked, in the same tone as the command to sit. I sat awestruck at what he was asking me, almost paralyzed, still gawking back at him. "Do not tell me you're stopping now," he laughed. "Remember, this is just a dream, my friend. The pain you feel right now is only momentary." His reassurance barely assured me. To truly get out, to truly find the exit to all of your problems, you must do this small sacrifice. What you are witnessing now is only an imaginary event affecting your reality. 2 slabs of flesh for your freedom, he lectured. For what he's asking of me, and what he's offering, I can't refuse. Holding out the handle, he pressured me with his expectant gaze, a gaze expecting me to accept, and also one of impending disappointment were I incapable of accepting his request. The offer was left open for what felt like hours. Will doing this really solve all my problems? I asked myself, but then I remembered the bad luck with the past job, not being able to get a new one, getting evicted, the little friends I knew all fading away. This was connected. This would all change. The life I won for myself would come back out from the one I have now. Even if this isn't true, what would I lose from doing this in a dream? Another nightmare to forget the next day. What the hell? There's no reason to refuse. For these past few months, I have been blinded from the opportunities I can take, the life I could live. Right now, my life is as dead-end as it could get. What would a gory nightmare do to me anyway? I've already had some before. I hesitantly took that strange dagger. With this small sacrifice, your time will come soon, he reminded me. Putting the knife over my arm, I hesitated more than once, like a dip of the toe on a pool. Each stab of the blade met with me pulling it swiftly away. Blood poured from my arms as I tried to pull out a big rectangular cut of my skin. Like carving a pumpkin. Like carving a pumpkin. I repeated this phrase. Seemed to make the stinging go away. Eventually, I managed to make the outlines. Bracing for the pain, I began to saw it all off. The flesh was like rubber, bending back from my arm like an old band-aid. The old man simply stood there the entire time, his expression completely blank as he observed my every move. It was as if he's Either seen this too many times or grew accustomed to hiding whatever sick satisfaction he was getting from this. I finally hacked off the skin from both arms. The anatomy of my upper arms were completely exposed. The stinging was practically gone now. Either I stripped off whatever nerves there were there, or the benefits are coming to me already. Put the flesh in the bowl. He approached me with a golden tin. I placed them into the bowl. Very good, he said. He started to smile, but the stretching of his face into a grin wouldn't stop. His cheeks would go to his eyes, then into the sides of his forehead. Soon his entire face was just wrinkles and one big smile of nothing but gums. You did well, Alex. Of course, your time has come now, he bellowed, and with that my vision began to blur before I could even make a reaction. It felt like I was on an overdose of anesthesia. I couldn't feel anything at all. I think this is it. My way out. Police report. Date of incident 2/7/20. Time 1:35 a.m. Location of incident redacted. Description. Victim found locked in the bathtub of their bathroom. The flesh of their arms from the wrist to the elbow had been severed off. The flesh was left on the toilet bowl, the toilet being left unflushed. Victim likely did this to themselves. The mother was also pushed with great force onto the hardwood floor, causing major head trauma. She has been hospitalized and is expected to make a complete recovery. The victim was found dead on the scene. Transcript of interview with Mrs. Darwin. Police. This interview is being tape recorded. I am redacted, and I'm based at redacted. We are here today to talk about the incident involving you and Alex Darwin. Mrs. Darwin. Yes. Police. My condolences for what has happened between you two. This was a very tragic event, and all of us at the police station are very sorry for your loss. Thank you. Let's begin then. So how did this all start exactly? Well, Alex was pretty well before moving in with me. Having a job, an apartment, Alex was pretty well established. It was moving in with me where the problem started. Right. So at first, Alex would actually apply for a new job and was relatively productive. But after the first week, Alex completely missed all these interviews, saying, I'm busy, later, I need to figure this out. This would happen for a month. I'm Alex's mom, but I couldn't take care of them forever. So what did you do about it? Well, by the time I was frustrated enough to speak out, Alex was already kind of gone. What do you mean by that? I mean, they would just stop responding to me completely. Always on that damn computer. I was never the confronting type, so I would just call out Alex's name, but I got nothing for it. That must have been difficult. It was. But Alex wasn't completely unresponsive. Sometimes talking about this maze thing, which actually started the week prior to the accident. And this maze may have caused this? I'm not sure. But Alex would just mumble about finding the exit to the maze. I wanted to get someone like a therapist, maybe, but Alex wouldn't budge. And I was kind of scared of waking them up. Why's that? Maybe because I was afraid of seeing what I would actually wake up exactly. So the day of the incident, tell me your account of the incident. That night I decided to force Alex to go to the hospital. But in the process, Alex just snapped up and pushed me onto the floor. It was a bad fall on the hardwood floor, so I kind of went unconscious right after. And what exactly was the last thing you heard Alex say? Screaming. The exit. Before rushing in and slamming the bathroom door shut. I I still remember the day as if it was yesterday. This was on my trip to Sweden, in an excluded location in the middle of a nature reservoir during winter holidays. I set up in a small abandoned hunting shack, which I got told by one of the friends who is native and has previously visited there. The first few days went on as expected. I was hiking around the area, checking out wildlife and nature, and just enjoying my me time. However, after day 5, strange stuff started happening. After a long day of hiking, I was sitting in the hunting shack, preparing a meal on the portable glass stove I had brought with me. The sun was beginning to set. The woods were filled with the faint gold shimmer of the sun. After consuming my dinner and having a little time to relax and rest, I went to go for a leak outside. The moment I touched the doorknob, I got filled with intense dread, as if my body was telling me to not open the door. I stood in front of the door for a second, then told myself to man up, that it was probably nothing, and I went outside. I went to some shrubbery and did my business. When I was done and walking back to my hunting shack, I heard a really strange clicking noise. A rapid click. The best description I could give to it is the predator trying to make a sound like the Grudge. I darted for the cabin. I've had more creepy stuff happen to me in the woods, and I was not planning to find out what was making that noise. I darted back inside, locked the door with chains and a padlock, and sat there, listening for any sounds. And then I heard it, a twig snapping. I nearly jumped through the roof when I heard it. My nerves were through the roof. When I heard it, tapping on the door, very softly. It almost seemed as if it was in a pattern. The tapping became knocking, then banging and scratching. Whatever was outside, it was planning to get in, and I was not letting it. I readied my hunting knife and sat motionless on the small stool, eyes locked on the door. I sat awake all night looking at the door, and only dared to move when sunlight had started to show itself, when the noise had long since faded away. I went outside the next day to once again relieve myself from my overly filled bladder. Then I headed back to the shack. I noticed the door. It looked as if a bear went absolutely mad on it. Whatever was at the door last night had some serious might. If this continued on, I wouldn't be able to rely on the door. This spooked me, but I went inside and tried to brush it off. I fell asleep not much later from the exhaustion from last night. Then I awoke. It was too late to head out, and I wanted to avoid tracking through unfamiliar wilderness in the dark, as that's just a request to get lost. And so I decided I was staying one more night before I was going to get out of there. Staying that last night was a big mistake. It all began with the clicking noises, and then the screams. Those horrible screams. This night was black. The moon was barely providing any light. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. This was no longer peaceful. It was eerie. Then I heard it. The clicking noise I had heard before. Distant but surely there, echoing through the silence of the forest. Then the screaming began. God, it sounded like a coyote who had been smoking cigars for centuries, getting closer and closer, but then silence. I was sitting upright in my sleeping bag, eyes wide, gripping my hunting knife, praying to God that the door would hold this night. It came back. The tapping started again. First on the door, and then on the window. I could see the silhouette of whatever was standing in front of the window through the blinds. The moon provided me just enough light to roughly make out some features. It looked humanoid, but it wasn't. The body was grossly disproportionate. Skinny long arms, skinny elongated body. But what really frightened me was the hands. God, those hands. Or rather claws. They were also long and skinny, ending in very pointy nails. Whatever this thing was, it could do some serious damage. It began circling the house. I could hear the snow under its feet, walking in a very slow, inconsistent way. It then stopped. It must have stood still for 40 minutes, with me on the other side of the door also not daring to move a muscle, doing my best to pick up on any noise to get an idea of where that thing was. It then made a dash for the door and rammed into it. I could see the old hinges struggle to withstand the power that this thing was throwing into the door. I knew if this door gave up, that I would be next. I pushed my back against the door and with all my might and pushed against it. After a good 10 minutes of this thing knocking at the door, it let out another blood-curdling scream and ran off. The speed of which the footsteps hit the floor was scarily fast. This thing was agile on its feet. At sunrise, I picked up my stuff as soon as possible. I wanted to get the hell out of here, back to the safety of my own home. When I finished packing, I immediately went for the direction of my car. It took me a long time to walk back to my car, taking breaks from exhaustion. I hadn't slept last night, and was carrying all my heavy equipment. When I was nearing the place where I parked my car, it was already getting dark again. The sunlight was disappearing rapidly. Luckily, I spotted my car in the distance. However, on closer look, I noticed some things. My tires were slashed, windows and headlights broken, full of dents and those very familiar scratches. Then I heard it, that same clicking noise. Disclaimer: names and certain facts will be changed to protect the identities of the innocent involved in this story. To be completely honest, I became a corrections officer because I felt like I couldn't fit in anywhere else. Is that sad? Yes. Is it true? When I made that decision, I truly felt that way. But after the story I am going to tell you, I've decided to work harder to put myself in a better position in life. Anyways, this all happened last Monday. The only day of the week I worked overnight shifts. The entire prison was abuzz that day because just 8 hours earlier, a new prisoner was transferred there. Not just any prisoner, mind you, but a bona fide monster. Harrison Pelton was charged with 2 murders, though is suspected of nearly 25. 4 counts of kidnapping and torture, 8 counts of assaulting a police officer, and finally, a federal terrorism charge. By his mid-20s, Harrison had decided that his batshit insane ideas on how this universe works, with him at the center, literally, were sound enough to attract followers, and somehow he was correct. Over the next 15 years, Harrison and his group, they never officially named themselves, grew in numbers and bloodlust, striking out whenever people announced skepticism of Harrison's beliefs. This attitude boiled over in early 2019, when Harrison and his 14 followers kidnapped a professor and his 3 daughters after the professor had made incendiary comments about a paper Harrison published the year prior. It still isn't known exactly what happened, but when police raided the abandoned farmhouse the group were staying in, they discovered the hell that Harrison put his captives through. The professor had been completely skinned, and his skin had somehow been stretched enough that it covered a good bit of a horse's stall. The daughters had been brutally mutilated, 2 of which somehow had their organs surgically altered to cause them unending pain, and the other 2 had multiple appendages severed and were used for various vile acts. The police were finally able to locate the farmhouse in March of 2019 after one of the daughters' phones had accidentally been turned on, resulting in a ping from a nearby cell tower. When the first few officers attempted to make arrests, they were met with armed resistance. So a couple hours later, 17 more and better armed officers arrived and engaged in a firefight with the group. One of the officers on scene had been deployed in Afghanistan before, and he remarked that this battle was worse than anything he had ever experienced over there. Off the record, he told a journalist, "One thing you will never be told about are the things that don't make sense. Mainly, after we had overpowered them and arrested the survivors, the amount of spent ammo found in that barn did not match the rate of fire they had been using beforehand. That is something that I have never been able to shake from my mind." The firefight lasted 45 minutes, wherein 1 police officer had died, 8 were seriously injured, and 9 cultists had died, with the rest being arrested after strangely laying down their weapons, admitting defeat. For some fucking reason, Harrison hadn't put into a supermax initially. This led to him somehow convincing 5 other prisoners to attempt an escape at their prison this past February. They nearly made it, but were stopped at the literal last second. This forced officials to smarten up, and after a legal battle fought with paperwork, they finally came to the conclusion that he would be transferred to a supermax just 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately for me, due to a mixture of a paperwork fuck-up with iffy COVID regulations, Harrison had to be vacated from his previous prison by the 1st, but he couldn't arrive at the supermax until the 3rd. So being the closest prison to that supermax, my great warden said he would take Harrison for a few days until he could be fully transferred. According to coworkers I've spoken to, the entire day leading up to Harrison's arrival, staff and prisoners were talking about him. A good bit of the chatter was about Harrison's looks. Guy is nearing his 40s and still could pass for 18, and reputation of being extremely uncooperative with pushy people, which could describe 90% of both prisoners and corrections officers. Harrison arrived at my prison around 3 p.m. that day. The prisoners had just had their lunch, and various groups were starting to have recreation. Again, due to wonderful COVID regulations, we could not put Harrison into isolation due to shitty timing. We had a big fight a few days before, so most of the rooms had been filled, and others just had prisoners moved out. But there was to be a wait time before a new prisoner is moved in there now, so he was moved to the community cell block, where our riskiest prisoners are housed. Of course, my block. From what I've been told, things went smoothly for the first few hours. Harrison was constantly bombarded by prisoners in his room asking all kinds of questions, and some possibly trying to provoke him, but he just sat there on his bunk, completely silent. The prisoners were disappointed by not being able to play with him, so when the on-duty officers yelled at the other prisoners to leave the cell, they did so without complaint. It wasn't until my shift began, 7:30 p.m., that things started to break down. It started with a little argument over dinner. The 3 occupants of the cell to the right of Harrison's felt as though somehow he had been given a larger portion of food than anyone else. They started shouting at us, claiming we were going to treat the celebrity better than them. Then, after we didn't give them the response that they wanted, they began berating Harrison, calling him a creep, a freak, and that he wasn't tough, just sick. Now, I was never told what it was, but Harrison had whispered an insult back to the 3 men, which caused them to jump from their table and storm Harrison's. Harrison jumped to his feet as well, and got in the faces of the other prisoners. I still remember the look of Harrison's eyes as he stared into theirs. He didn't really look angry. He looked hungry, like a predator that knew he had just caught some prey. Luckily for the officers on duty, the men never came to blows. After the stare-down went on for a bit too long, both sides just decided to back off for some reason. The next 2 or so hours went all right. There were no more incidents, and the prisoners quietly went to their rooms at 9 for lights out. I was charged with direct observation from an upstairs room that night. About 20 minutes after the men went to bed, the overall block lights turned on and then off, and then continued to do this in rapid succession for about 20 more seconds before stopping and leaving the lights on. I radioed down to an officer and asked them what was going on with the lights. According to the guys downstairs, nobody had been in eyeshot of the light switch for the past few minutes, but they did confirm that someone had switched the block lights on. About 40 minutes later, I began to feel strange. Even though nothing had really changed, I was suddenly filled with extreme anxiety, so much so that I continuously squirmed in my chair and kept looking around the room. It felt like I was being watched by some man-eating beast. Unfortunately, this feeling was a bit indicated after my fourth look around, when I saw something awful in the door's window. Standing on the other side of the only door to the observation room was what I could only describe as a misshapen face. Grayed skin, a right eye that sat nearly half an inch lower than the left, a bulbous chin and a nose that almost perfectly resembled a pig's snout. Obviously, I had never seen this face before, so with that classic fear hesitation coursing through my veins, I struggled to get out of my chair and moved slowly towards the door. About halfway there, the face disappeared from the window, and when this happened, it felt like a light had been switched. Feeling strangely empowered, I sprinted out of the room's door and looked around. Unfortunately for me, there was nobody in the hallway where the room's door was located in, so I sprinted toward the hallway connected to the left. Now, I swear, I was only gone for about a minute and a half, so you can imagine the jump scare I got when I arrived at the second hallway, only to be met with a chorus of blood-curdling screams. I twisted around as fast as I could, trying to figure out where the screams were coming from, and when I realized that they were actually coming from inside the block, I ran back to my observation room, slammed down on the alarm button, and headed back out so I could get into the block. The screams stopped as I sprinted down the stairs. Luckily, my fellow officers work quick, so a couple already had shields by the time I got to the block's entrance. We entered a few minutes later, screaming at the prisoners to wake up and get on their cell's floor. One of the other officers demanded to know where the screaming was coming from. "Officer, I believe that was my neighbors." A voice I had heard on the news crooned. A cell to the left of Harrison screamed that it wasn't them, so the other officers and I ran to the one on the right. Even though it had been over a week since, I can still smell the copper coating the inside of my nose. I wasn't at the front of the line, so my heart jumped as I heard one of the officers scream and frantically tried to get the cell door open. Inside was what I can only describe as meat. There wasn't a single identifying feature inside that room. The floor, walls, and ceiling were coated in blood, organs, and meat. Investigators allowed me to leave the prison once I had given my statement, and I don't intend on going back. I did get in contact with one of the two officers that were declared mentally competent to remain on the job, though. According to them, Harrison was forced into solitary, against codes on a blanket accusation of unruliness. According to the officers who moved him, he couldn't stop smiling. As for the dead prisoners, the investigation was handed to an unnamed authority. Thankfully, Harrison was moved to a supermax prison where he will remain for the rest of his life. But for me, I don't intend on taking another step inside a prison. We were struggling to open the door. We had put all our body weights on it, and still it wouldn't even budge. It was curious that the door wasn't wide open at this point. After all, the house of God should always be open to anyone. That, and also the fact that this archaic cathedral was abandoned. Our struggles went to a halt as we had to regain our strength. I rested my hand on the wall to have a third point of support. Then I felt it move and my balance swayed with it. I tried to regain control of my equilibrium, but I stumbled on the floor. I heard my light footprints echo in the cathedral. As I stabilized myself, I grinned a little, thinking how ironical it was that I was centimeters away from opening the door, but because of my narrow-mindedness, I just had to waste my breath trying to push that wall. To my defense, the entire portal of the cathedral was made out of wood, and I couldn't distinguish where the door was. It was a stark contrast to the walls made of cyan stone of the cathedral. It seemed like a gate leading you to another world. I guess that is the truth. After all, its purpose was to educate the teachings of God to the people and to bring them closer to Him. Every other church or cathedral that I had attended to had this sensation of tranquility. But once I crossed the border of this one, it made me feel uneasy. Probably because it was the middle of the night and every tiny movement I did echoed through the hall of this holy place. "You okay, Andy?" "Hey, okay, Peter. Give me the paint and the candle." "Here you go. Do you want me to help you prep up?" "No, it's going to be okay. The rules said that when meeting him you have to be alone, so just to be sure I'm going to do it alone." "Okay, as you wish. I'm going to be outside. Good luck." "Thanks." I closed the door. I heard the sound echo in the cathedral. It made me shiver. As I was walking down the center of the nave, I checked my watch. 11:30 p.m. Still 30 minutes until midnight. I still had a lot of time. To start the summoning, I had to first draw an eye with red paint and then put the candle in the pupil and light it when the clock hit midnight. Also, I had to desecrate this place. On the paper that had the directions, it was written that any holy place would do, so Peter came with the brilliant idea of doing it here, where there would be no repercussions. After checking out this place, I was astounded at how it could be in such a pristine condition. I did a little routine and took some pictures with my smartphone of the painting, statues, and stained glasses. It was wonderful. How this place was so well built and in such great shape. Too bad I have to destroy it a little bit, I thought. After some pondering, I finally took the picture of Jesus on the cross. I walked up the stairs to get a good look at him. He seemed normal. I don't know why I thought he would have been different from the other ones. I took the picture and then stepped back. Soon after, I started to desecrate this temple, destroying the statues, flipping over the benches, and overall wreaking havoc. I lingered there for a while waiting, hearing the rain droplets outside. I hope Peter will be okay, I thought. I sat on one of the benches, admiring the emptiness of this place, astonished at how such a beautiful thing had been ravaged. The years of work that had been put into this, destroyed in a single instance. It is okay. It's all for a good cause, I thought. I exhaled and looked at Jesus, hoping that he would forgive me. I bolted upwards. It seemed that he had moved. Something about him had changed. Then I heard a loud beeping sound. It was midnight. I quickly went over the eye and lit the candle. I saw the confessional. The rules strictly noted that it was very important to enter it. When the salesman would enter in the other booth and grant you any wish you wanted. The cost? It depends. Sometimes he tells you a story, and other times he wants your soul. A reasonable price, I guess. I entered the confessional. I opened and closed the wooden door and sat down, then said, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." I heard my voice echo in the cathedral. Now I only needed to wait until his arrival. I waited impatiently. The seconds, minutes, and hours dragged on. I looked at my watch and saw that only 30 seconds had passed by, of which I thought I was there all an eternity. I had enough. I was going to leave the confessional, but then I heard the slow cracking of the portal. It froze up. Probably the wind, I thought. As I heard nothing for an instant, My bravery surged and I started to exhale when I heard footsteps. Someone was walking. Or something. The footsteps hitting the floor echoed all over the cathedral as I sat there paralyzed by fear. The sound was coming closer and closer. As it arrived in front of my door, its movement stopped, and then it opened the curtain and entered the booth next to mine. I heard the cracking of wood as it sat down, and it spoke. The salesman spoke. "Do not worry, my child. You have done right. This religion only praises a false idol, only an illusion." "What do you mean?" I asked with a trembling voice. "Would you like to hear a story?" He replied. "Yeah, please." I smiled. I couldn't believe it. My wish was going to be granted and I only needed to hear a story. "You see, child, the story starts at the year 0 for you feeble humans. For me, it is just after the strange eons, something you would not understand. I met this young boy, an orphan. He had summoned me like you have. His wish? To create a cult. You see, he already was good with visual deception, so all he needed was a greater force to help him create a sect that would grow larger and larger, in order for him to be forever immortalized in history and in the memory of every individual. I know what you are thinking. Why had I agreed to his offer? Well, in return, everyone who gave their soul to the Lord would actually be taken by me. It was my golden age. I had tried with other people, but they did not have the same charismatic personality and the same drive as him. I took everything for granted back then. The salesman spoke with an air of melancholy. I wanted to know what came next. He was a good storyteller. I will give him that. Then a clerical assembly of priests had to ruin all the fun I had. They thought I was a demon. They tried to exorcise me. They tried to exorcise something that was made up. After too much flagellation, too much torture, I managed to escape, and then saw the birth of God. He is a newborn compared to me, and still, he gets more souls than me. His shrieking voice rang all over the halls. There was a moment of silence. The salesman seemed to have gotten irritated. I could feel my sweat running down my forehead and neck. "Now what do you wish?" Got nearer to the screen and said, "I want my sister to be alive again." The salesman laughed. "That's quite a request." "Can you do it?" "Yes, but the prize for it is quite expensive." "Fair exchange, child." "But I already paid my due. I heard your story." "And I thought you would want to be a millionaire," he said with a tint of sarcasm. "Then what's the price?" "Your soul." It resonated inside the cathedral, the sound bouncing from wall to wall. "Sorry." "Your soul. That is the law of equilibrium." I put all my weight on my right leg, preparing myself to bolt out of my booth and not look back. "And if I don't want to seal the deal?" I asked with a trembling voice. "Well, you see, child, I am a merchant of souls. My title, the Salesman, asserts that I seal every deal that comes my way. My reputation precedes me, but I feel merciful. I will let you leave this place, but you have to give me your face. You see, the torture those priests undertook on me has, for the lack of a better word, destroyed mine. Who knows, maybe this is fate, and your face will match my skull." I felt his breath on my neck, passing through the screen. I ran as fast as I could, pushing the door so hard that it broke. I heard the salesman getting out of his booth pursuing me. I ran, jumping over the scattered and broken benches, nearly tumbling over because of a statue, but it did not matter. I persisted towards the door and saw Peter opening it. "Get out!" I yelled, but thankfully he didn't need the clue. He opened it as wide as he could and tried to run away. I passed through the door and exited the cathedral. I ran close to him, now hearing the swishing noise of the mud under my feet and feeling and hearing the thunderstorm. We nearly made it out, seeing our bikes on the horizon, but then Peter slipped on the muddy ground. I looked back and tried to help him, but the salesman had him. The salesman had the shape of a human. I say shape because nothing else was seen except for his hands and face. Everything else was covered with an old, silky fabric and a black chain made with a strange opaque material that made no sound and seemed to levitate a little. He towered over us. The fact that he could have fit in that booth unnerved me. But what was seen made me want to stop existing. He had long, tiny fingers that had all the same length, and their texture was just wrong. And his face, it looked like it had been burned, scars dominating his cranial features. The only characteristics left were his tiny eyes, which, each one of them, were blinking at its own rhythm. There were so many that counting them would be impossible, and his mouth, a constant grin ear to ear if he would have had any. He held Peter with both of his hands and said, "Now it is whether you or him. You have to choose between your face and his soul. So, child, what will you choose?" I will not talk about what happened after because the decision I partook in scarred me for the rest of my life.
A few weeks ago, on a cool April night, I made the trek to my school's library in one last desperate bid to pass my data structures and algorithms class. I was failing, admittedly through my own fault, but if I could manage to pull my final project together and make at least an 86, I would scrape by and avoid having to take the class again. So I threw my laptop, headphones, and multiple energy drinks into my backpack and prepared myself to spend the whole night working. The main floor of the library was pretty empty, but I decided to go to my usual spots anyway. It was a small group of tables on the 4th floor, tucked away in a corner and surrounded by rows of bookshelves. Most students don't make it up to that level. I'm pretty sure most people don't even know you can go to the 4th floor. You can't get to it from the elevator. Instead, you have to get off the elevator on the 3rd floor and take the staircase that's tucked away in an alcove next to a dusty vending machine. They aren't connected to the main stairs, so most people miss them. When I reached the study tables, there was only one other person there, some older guy intently working on a paper. I nodded to him and sat down, glancing at the clock on the wall. 9 p.m. I winced. Taking that nap earlier had definitely been a mistake. Despite my late start, I managed to work pretty steadily for several hours. I was so focused that I even forgot to pull out any of my energy drinks. When I finally looked up from my barely working program, a couple necessary functions had to be commented out completely or that stupid thing wouldn't even compile. It was right around 2 a.m. I shifted in my seat, my back protesting from how long I had been hunched over my laptop. I needed to walk around and stretch for a bit. I stood up and wandered down an aisle, scanning book titles idly. There seemed to be a thin layer of dust over most of them. I wondered if anyone even checked these books out. I made it to the end of the aisle and rounded the corner, intending to walk back down the adjacent aisle to the study tables, but the end of it was blocked by another bookshelf. I turned around and started to make my way down the first aisle. My steps faltered. The end of this aisle was blocked by a bookshelf too. I slowed to a halt and looked up and down the row. Had I gotten turned around? Surely not. My path had been practically a straight line, but I must have. It's not like the heavy metal shelves and moved in the minute it took me to walk down the aisle. I turned back and started to try the other way again when I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I could feel someone watching me. Very slowly, I turned my head towards the shelf to my right. Nothing. I turned my head to the left and almost jumped a foot in the air. There was something standing on the next aisle over, peering at me through a narrow gap in the books. Its face was a sickly gray and its eyes were wide and unblinking. It didn't react when I gasped. "You scared me," I choked out, taking a half step back. It cocked its head. "Game?" the creature rasped. At least, that's what I think it said. I could barely understand it. "What?" I took another step away. "Game. Game. Game." Its voice grew stronger every time it spoke, as if it had gone unused for a long time. I don't have time for a game," I stammered. Another step back. "I have to get back to my..." The creature's hand slammed through the row of books, knocking several to the floor. It flailed, long gray fingers grabbing for me. "Game," the creature shrieked, and I didn't hang around any longer to find out what it wanted to play. I booked it down the aisle and ran as far in the opposite direction from the thing as I could. In my terror, I didn't notice at first that the rows of bookshelves I was running down were much longer than they should have been. The library was pretty big, but I was on the smaller 4th floor. I should have been running over the parking lot at that point. I finally stopped to catch my breath when I thought I had gotten far enough away from the creature. I realized that I couldn't see the walls of the library anymore. Only rows and rows of shelves, stocked to the brim with dusty books. I looked through the gaps between the books, trying to find the study area or anything that would tell me where I was. But there was nothing. Nothing but books and shelves as far as the eye could see. Above me, the fluorescent lighting buzzed. I thought about climbing a shelf and looking out over the tops to find my way back, but I was honestly afraid of what I would find if I did. What if I couldn't find the stairs again? What if the library had completely disappeared, and the only thing left were bookshelves, stretching eternally? I was pulled out of my panic when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I froze, watching for any movement. There it was again, a flash of movement, unnaturally fast. I zeroed in on it. There, several rows away, was the creature, staring at me as if it had never moved. When it caught my gaze, it ducked out of view, and I heard a scampering sound. It sounded like something running on all fours. I took off, even though my body was still on fire from the last bout of running. I twisted and looped through the rows in a way I hoped would throw it off my trail. Eventually, I slowed down again to save my strength. But the whole time, I knew that somewhere nearby, the creature still haunted me. The shelves became more labyrinthine with every corner I turned. There were no more neat lines of adjacent rows. The aisles twisted and turned and branched and stopped dead with no warning. The books looked different too. Some looked absolutely ancient, as if they would crumble if I tried to pull them off the shelves. Some books looked oddly new. I pulled one of the newer books off the shelf in a moment of untimely curiosity. The front cover was a single word in a language I didn't know. I flipped it open and turned a few pages. To my surprise, they were all blank. It was getting dark then. Like the buzzing lights couldn't quite reach me wherever I was, even though I could still see them above me. As I turned another corner, I came upon a small area with no other paths out of it besides the one I came in through. It looked like the bookshelves had been haphazardly pushed aside to form a small clearing, and loose paper from several fallen books was scattered everywhere. I felt my heart thud in my chest when I saw that some of the pages were stained, a rusted brown color that was almost black. I took a step further in, and almost tripped over something half hiding under a crumbling book.
I kicked the book away and froze in horror. Sitting on the floor in front of me was a human skull, picked completely clean. Suddenly, I knew the truth. All my running had been for nothing. I had never had a chance to escape. These shelves weren't a maze. They were a web. The creature had been chasing me here the whole time, getting me slowly, carefully, stuck fast in its trap. And now, I was here in its nest, waiting for it to come to dinner. Behind me, I heard the scampering sound again. I whipped around to see the creature peering at me from the end of the aisle. Its body was hidden behind the bookcase, and it poked its head around the corner in a way that was almost childlike. I had seen how fast it could move. I only had a moment to act. "Wait!" I screamed. It tilted its head ever so slightly. My mind raced. "You wanted to play a game, right? A game?" The creature stared, unmoving. "It's not really a game unless you give me a chance to escape. How is it a game if there's no possible way I can win?" As I distracted the creature, I looked around for any way to get out. Luck must have been with me because I noticed a small gap between two shelves that I hadn't seen before. I threw myself at the gap, barely managing to squeeze through as the creature rushed toward me. I felt fingers barely graze the back of my shirt as I took off running. I took a few more random turns and then, like I'd never left, I burst free of the shelves, back at the group of study tables. The only other person on the 4th floor, the older guy from before who had been writing a paper, gave me a dirty look before focusing back on his laptop screen. I didn't bother to grab my stuff. I sprinted for the stairs, going down them 2 at a time until I hit the 3rd floor. I ran to the main staircase, tearing down them so fast I almost fell. Then through lobby and out the main door, gulping fresh air that I thought I'd never taste again. A couple days later, I asked a friend to check the library's lost and found for me, and she was able to get most of my things and bring them to me. My earbuds were missing, but I didn't care. I considered it a small price to pay for my life. I also failed my algorithms class, but honestly, that was going to happen anyway. For a couple weeks, I thought I was safe. I really did. I thought I had managed to beat the creature and escape its labyrinth. I had thought of it like a spider, something that would catch the unsuspecting fly that stumbled into its web but couldn't give chase if the fly unstuck itself. But now I know the truth. It had taunted me with freedom like a cat with a mouse, letting me dart out from underneath its grasp, only to snap me back up again in the next second. During the day, I can feel its eyes on me, watching me from dark corners as I make my way around campus, even as I give the library a wide berth. I hear the sound of the creature's movement in my nightmares now, every single night. And every night, it sounds like it's getting closer. As a broke student, you know we're always looking for a way to make quick money without having to do anything you're not okay with. I've filled out online surveys, tested products for small amounts of money, and done jobs for friends and family to gather a little extra cash. I've filled job applications out like you wouldn't believe. But you probably would believe that it ain't easy to find a job with little to no experience when you're fresh out of high school and straight into college. My parents gave me money during high school, and truth be told, I'd rather have been hanging out with my friends outside of school than looking for a part-time job. So I ended up in college and experience-less. I am rooming with my friend from high school, Kate. Kate was pretty much in the same boat as me when it came to not having experience and finding it hard to get a job. We were Google searching how to make money fast, since despite both of us being from pretty well-off families, we didn't want to have to depend on our parents for money whenever we wanted it. We came across a blog that had some pretty bogus ideas, but some okay ones too. The one that caught our eyes was selling things we didn't want anymore on eBay for some quick cash. We figured we had plenty of stuff we could sell for a decent amount, so we both put some items up for sale and waited around. Honestly, money came in quicker than I would have thought. It wasn't huge amounts, but given we were living together and could share appliances like hair dryers and straightening irons, we had no problem selling the spares. We'd made enough money within a couple of weeks to be able to take a break from it and go spend our newly earned money. We were browsing the homepage to see if there was anything we fancied. Hey, Kate nudged me. I wonder what the weirdest shit that's been sold on here is. I let out a chuckle. Let's find out. We clicked through ads until we came across one ad that caught both of our eyes. My breath in a jar. Buy it now. $79.99. Kate and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. I wondered if anything like this had sold before, so I typed in breath in a jar, clicked search and filtered the results to sold items only. When I say I was shocked, that's a gigantic understatement. There was pages of this sort of thing. People claiming it was the breath of celebrities, their own breath, you name it. One had sold for $400 that the seller claimed was a celebrity that had died a month or two prior. We had a good laugh at it all before a stupid thought popped into my head. I bet someone is willing to pay me big bucks for my soul on here. I laughed. Kate snorted, shoving me. You're serious? Dude, you have to post this. It would be the funniest thing ever. I shot Kate a smile and got to work on the ad. Soul for sale. 19-year-old girl. Once you hit buy, it's yours for all eternity. $50,000. No refunds. Kate let out a loud gasp. Anna, she started. 50K? Come on. What? A soul this great don't come cheap. She rolled her eyes, spewed out some shit about how nobody was going to pay that much, and after a few days, we'd pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. 2 nights ago, at around 1 a.m., we'd just finished watching a movie and we got into bed. We were chatting in the dark and getting pretty tired when my phone vibrated from my nightstand. I picked it up, looked at the notification, and screamed, dropping my phone on the floor beside my bed. Kate jumped out of bed, picking my phone up off the floor. She too let out a scream when she read the notification. PayPal. $50,000 from... I looked at Kate, who stood there in silence staring at me. This has to be a joke, right? It's not real. Surely it's not. She passed my phone back to me. I went into my PayPal account, clicked my balance, and hit withdraw. Then a notification popped up from my bank app. $50,000 received from PayPal. I screamed again. I showed it to Kate. She screamed again. Campus security knocked on our door a few times asking if we were all right. We assured him that we were fine and sat in our beds, just looking at my bank account balance. I don't know what time we fell asleep, but eventually we did. Yesterday I woke up and Kate was already up and dressed. Come on, sleepyhead. She pulled the blankets off me. Shower and get dressed. We've got some shopping to do. I groaned and got out of bed. There's still a pandemic, you know. Okay. The mall is open and we have masks. Come on. I sighed again, and eventually, after some more persuasion, jumped in the shower, got dressed, and we left the dorm to head to the mall. Kate was so full of energy. She even had a spring in her step. As for me, I felt nothing. I put it down to me being tired, so when Kate asked me why I seemed so grumpy, I gave her the excuse I was giving myself. I bought so much shit. I bought a new laptop for school that I desperately needed, but that didn't satisfy me. I bought so many pairs of shoes, so many outfits, So much makeup, but I still wasn't satisfied. Kate was in her element all day. I, on the other hand, wasn't. I just wanted to go back to our dorm. The time finally came to go home, and for the first time all day, I felt somewhat happy. Happy it was over. When I got back to the dorm, my parents called me, and I couldn't wait to get rid of them. I hadn't seen either of them for over a month by this point, but I was glad of it. My dad was halfway through telling me he loved me, and I hung up, making a gagging noise. It was from that moment that I felt like something was wrong. I've always loved my parents, and talking to them, but now I couldn't stand the thought of them. Hey, I turned to Kate, who was trying on her new outfits. Do you think that person really bought my soul? Kate let out a loud laugh and checked herself out again in the mirror. Dude, come on. Do you really think people were selling famous breath? You're being stupid. Felt as though my blood was burning inside of me. I hated what she just said. I hated her. Yeah, and you're being a bitch. I snapped. Hey. Kate turned to me, hands on her hips. What have you got your underwear in a twist for? Maybe you need some sleep or something. Jeez. Maybe you need your throat slit. Kate looked at me in what I can only describe as shock and a little fear. She took a small step backwards and stared at me without saying a word. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I mumbled. Truth is, I did mean it. Something came over me, and in that moment, I really meant it. She stood there for another second, staring. After what felt like fucking forever, she finally spoke. What's gotten into you, Anna? Why are you acting so weird today? I shrugged my shoulders and stood up, heading towards the door, and leaving Kate stood in our room, completely flabbergasted. I went to a nearby store and bought some supplies before heading to a park to sit there for a while. When I finally arrived back at the dorm, Kate was asleep in her bed. I walked slowly over to her and took the box of razor blades I bought out of my bag. I stared at it for a while before looking down at Kate when something caught my eye from beside me. The mirror that was on the wall facing Kate's bed was showing my reflection, standing over my best friend with a razor in my hand. I watched, completely still, as my arm in my reflection moved and ran its finger over the sharp end of the razor blade. Blood trickled down from its finger, and my reflection raised its arm and sucked it off. I was frozen. I could taste my blood. My reflection leaned over Kate's bed and dug the razor blade into her neck, quickly pulling it across her neck. Blood spilled everywhere as Kate's reflection twitched and jerked and tried to stop herself from bleeding. I looked down to my best friend beside me, who was sleeping soundly, unharmed. Kate's reflection stopped convulsing, and my reflection raised the blade and pulled it across its tongue. I could taste blood again. My reflection walked forwards, and I followed, standing face to face with myself. This is the beginning, my reflection whispered, blood trickling out of my mouth as it spoke. I stared into its eyes. They were cold, black, soulless. I shut my eyes tight, and when I opened them, I was looking at myself again, my real self. I stared into my eyes for a few seconds, noticing that there was a dark black ring around the outside of my iris, and I think it's very slowly growing. This morning I checked it again, and it's slightly bigger. The scariest part of all this is that when I was watching my reflection kill my best friend, part of me enjoyed it. I thought it was a joke. I thought for sure I'd get an email from whoever this was demanding their money back. But 30 minutes ago, they left a 5-star review on my eBay page. I sold my soul on eBay for only $50,000, and I need to get it back.